Chapter 1. The Case of the Missing Cigarette Case. The fog rolled low over London's Fleet Street, muffling the clatter of carriages and footsteps into a hushed symphony of the city at twilight. Inside the modest but well-kept study of Hercule Poirot, the fire crackled with dutiful warmth, casting flickering shadows on the walls lined with meticulous stacks of case files. Poirot sat near the hearth, grooming his impeccable moustache with the diligence of a man who prized order above all else. He had just completed his evening tisane when a sharp knock interrupted the calm. Hastings, ever the loyal companion, opened the door to reveal a woman whose elegance seemed to defy the gloom outside, clad in a deep burgundy coat and a cloche hat that concealed her eyes. She stepped into the lamplight with the poise of someone long accustomed to society's higher circles. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, her voice smooth but brittle at the edges, "I am Lady Winthrop. I come to you not with a murder, but with a mystery that may lead to one." Poirot gestured for her to sit. "You have intrigued me already, madame. Proceed." Lady Winthrop removed her gloves with deliberate slowness, placing them neatly on her lap. "My husband, Lord Arthur Winthrop, came home last evening in an unusually agitated state. He said little during dinner and retired early. This morning I found something most odd in his study. A cigarette case I have never seen before. Amber, inlaid with gold, exquisite, foreign, and inside it a single Turkish cigarette, unlit." Poirot arched an eyebrow. "Your husband, he does not smoke?" "He despises the habit," she said with a tight smile, "which is why I found it so strange." Hastings frowned. Could it not be a guest's? Someone left it behind, perhaps. Lady Winthrop shook her head. "The study was locked as always. Only Arthur has the key." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Did you confront him?" She hesitated. "I asked. He denied any knowledge of it, but I could tell. He was lying." Poirot tapped his fingers together, eyes glinting. "The amber cigarette case. It is not merely decorative, I presume. It means something. Madam, are you in fear for your husband's life?" She hesitated again. "I fear more for his past catching up with him. There are whispers of Cairo, of debts, of a certain woman who vanished." Now Poirot stood, his silhouette thrown tall by the firelight. "Then we must act quickly. Madame, I will take your case. We shall see what secrets lie within this amber clue." As the door closed behind Lady Winthrop, Poirot turned to Hastings. "Mon ami, do you recall what I always say? It is the smallest detail, the glint of amber, the scent of tobacco, that leads to truth. And I suspect in this case it shall lead us deep into shadows." And in the silent hush that followed, a whiff of foreign smoke seemed to drift through the room, as if the mystery had already arrived. Chapter 2. A Fractured Memory. The morning after Lady Winthrop's visit dawned grey and listless, as if the city itself was reluctant to stir from slumber. Poirot, however, was already seated at the breakfast table, his soft-boiled egg precisely cracked, his toast cut into uniform triangles, and his grey eyes alight with quiet anticipation. Hastings shuffled in, still battling the remnants of sleep and the unforgiving British damp. "You're rather chipper this morning, Poirot," he muttered, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "But of course, Hastings, A new case, an intriguing client, and an object of elegance and mystery. The amber cigarette case. It is precisely the kind of puzzle I find invigorating. He tapped his teaspoon against the egg with a small flourish. You truly believe something sinister lies behind it? Hastings asked. Poirot gave a tiny shrug. We must not leap to conclusions. That is your domain, mon ami. Mine is the methodical gathering of facts, the observation of the subtle, the invisible threads that connect appearances. He stood and straightened his cuffs. Today we begin with Lord Arthur Winthrop. I should like to see him unannounced. The truth, I find, is more easily extracted when it is startled. They arrived at the Winthrop residence in Kensington just past 10 o'clock. The house stood tall and quiet, its red brick exterior softened by ivy and the well-tended garden beyond the wrought-iron gate. A butler received them with cool civility and led them to a drawing-room scented faintly of old leather and lavender. Lord Arthur entered moments later, a tall man with silver at his temples, his bearing still that of a soldier. Though his eyes seemed burdened by sleepless nights, he did not appear surprised to see them. I take it my wife has been to see you, he said, standing by the fireplace, refusing to sit. Poirot inclined his head. Indeed. She brought to my attention an object of interest, one that does not align with the habits of a man who despises the habit, as she put it. Winthrop gave a faint smile that never reached his eyes. So, this is about the cigarette case. It is, Poirot said. You denied any knowledge of it. Was that the truth? I found it on my desk yesterday morning, he replied curtly. I assumed it was left by a visitor. I have many colleagues, political acquaintances, former friends. I placed it in the drawer and thought no more of it. Curious, Poirot said softly. Would you allow me to see the study where it was found? A muscle in Winthrop's jaw twitched. If you must. He led them down a panelled corridor to a room at the end, a masculine chamber of dark wood, maps, and books on military campaigns. The desk was a large mahogany piece, its surface obsessively tidy. Winthrop opened a drawer and handed the amber cigarette case to Poirot. It was a thing of beauty, rich orange-gold resin with subtle striations, set with a fine gold clasp. Poirot opened it. The single Turkish cigarette still lay nestled inside. He brought the case to his nose and sniffed. Ah, jasmine, he murmured. Jasmine? Hastings asked. A common fragrance used in Turkish tobacco, though this is of an especially rare variety. And look, on the inside edge, a faint smudge. Lipstick, I would wager, though nearly invisible. Poirot turned to Winthrop. Tell me, my lord, do you know a woman who wears a jasmine scent and favours lipstick in a coral tone? Winthrop's mask cracked just slightly. You're implying what, exactly? Winthrop's mask cracked just slightly. You're implying what, exactly? I am not implying, I am inquiring. He sighed. Years ago, I knew someone in Cairo. Her name was Celeste Dubois. She disappeared. Disappeared how? She was part of a rather dubious circle of expats. She dabbled in questionable business ventures, art dealing, antiques, black market items. There was a scandal. She vanished. Some said she was murdered. Others claimed she fled with a fortune. And what was your involvement? We were close. Nothing improper, I assure you. But when she vanished, I was questioned by the authorities. I had nothing to hide. I returned to England. That was 15 years ago." Poirot examined the cigarette case once more. "And you've had no contact since?" "None. I thought her dead." Poirot closed the case gently and handed it back. "Then perhaps, my lord, the dead have begun to send their calling cards." They took their leave, and as the cab rattled away from Kensington, Hastings looked over at Poirot with a mixture of confusion and concern. "You think this Celeste woman is back?" "I do not know," Poirot admitted. "But this case, it is no accident. It was meant to be found. Someone wishes to unsettle Lord Winthrop. Whether that someone is friend, foe, or ghost remains to be seen. And the lipstick, the scent? Details, Hastings. They are clues dressed in glamour. We must find out who sells this tobacco in London. It is rare, perhaps too rare to be purchased anonymously." That afternoon, Poirot visited several tobacconists in the West End, asking after the blend of jasmine-laced Turkish cigarettes. At the third shop, a slim, sharp-eyed vendor with nicotine-stained fingers perked up. "Ah, yes, we carry that blend. Not many ask for it. Too strong for most tastes. Have you sold it recently?" The man thought for a moment. "A week ago. Woman, well-dressed. French accent, I think. Bought a single tin. Said it was a gift." Poirot nodded. "Do you keep records?" "Not of single purchases. Cash only." Poirot offered a card. "If she returns, please contact me at once." That evening, as Hastings paced the sitting-room, Poirot sat in thought, fingers templed beneath his chin. "This woman," Hastings said finally, "do you believe she's Celeste?" "It is a possibility. But there is another I am considering. A third party. Someone who knows of the affair, knows of the scandal. Someone manipulating events from the shadows." "Why now, though?" "After 15 years." "Exactly," Poirot said, eyes brightening. "The question is not why now, but why Winthrop? What has he done recently that might provoke such a resurrection?" They were interrupted by the sound of a soft envelope sliding through the letterbox. Poirot rose, retrieved it, and opened it with a flick of his finger. Inside was a single sheet of vellum, upon which was written, "A spark glows again in the amber. Soon it will burn. No signature, no address." But the scent of jasmine clung to the paper like ever memory. Poirot stared at the note for a long time. "The game," he whispered, "has begun." Chapter 3. The fragmented truth, the morning light filtering through the curtains of Poirot's flat, held none of the ominous beauty of the previous day. It was bright and sterile, as if the city were attempting to cleanse itself of secrets. But Poirot knew better. Mysteries did not dissolve with sunlight. They only grew more refined, more dangerous. The strange letter lay on the mantelpiece, its message etched in Poirot's mind. "A spark glows again in the amber. Soon it will burn." He turned it over, again in his gloved hands, eyeing the precise handwriting. The author of this note is educated, precise, and, how do you say it? "A theatrical soul," he remarked to Hastings, who was busy buttering his toast. "Sounds like someone with a flair for drama, certainly," Hastings agreed. "Do you think it's a threat or a warning?" "That, mon ami, is what we must determine. But the metaphor of fire, I do not like it. Fire consumes, fire destroys. Someone is playing a dangerous game. Poirot had sent the note to his trusted contact at Scotland Yard, Inspector Japp, to analyze the paper and ink. In the meantime, he and Hastings had another lead to follow, a woman with a French accent who had purchased rare Turkish cigarettes laced with jasmine. They began with the tobacconist in Mayfair, who had spoken to Poirot the previous day. He greeted them with a curt nod and a whisper of tobacco trailing from his collar. "She was in again this morning," he said as soon as Poirot entered. "Didn't buy anything. Just asked if her purchase had caused a stir." "What did she look like? Mid-30s, perhaps. Tall, dark hair, a beauty but cold around the eyes. Dressed all in black today." "She gave no name?" Poirot asked. "No, but she left this behind." He pulled a small square of tissue from behind the counter. A faint trace of lipstick stained one corner, a soft coral pink. Poirot took the tissue gently and examined it. "Merci, you have been most helpful." As they exited, Hastings frowned. "If this is Celeste Dubois, then she's certainly not hiding. On the contrary, Hastings, she is revealing herself just enough. This is performance. She wishes to be seen by some, not by all." "Then what's her end game?" Poirot paused on the street, his gaze distant. "Power, revenge, or perhaps redemption. We shall see." Back at their flat, a telegram awaited them from Inspector Japp. Letter paper from Grace and Tunnel stationers. Ink Belgian import. More to follow. "Japp, Grace and Tunnel," Poirot repeated. "A high-end stationer. Very exclusive clientele." He made a call and arranged a visit that afternoon. Grace and Tunnel occupied a discreet little shop tucked between a jeweler and a milliner on Bond Street. Inside, the air smelled of parchment and lavender, and a clerk with an owl-like stare greeted them. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot," she said, recognizing the name. "We do indeed carry the paper and ink described. In fact, there are only a few clients who order that specific combination." She consulted a tidy ledger behind the counter, one finger gliding down the entries. The most recent purchaser was a Miss Valerie Moreau. She bought a set just last week. "Do you have an address?" "We deliver to her lodgings, 17 Beaufort Crescent, Chelsea." Poirot's eyes glinted. "You have been Chelsea." Poirot's eyes glinted. "You have been most helpful, mademoiselle." The cab ride to Beaufort Crescent, Hastings was nearly bouncing with anticipation. "You think she's our mystery woman, then? Celeste using an alias? Perhaps. Or perhaps Valerie Moreau is a new player entirely. Either way, we are drawing closer to the flame." Beaufort Crescent was a quiet, respectable street, its white Georgian terraces pristine behind neat hedges. Number 17 was a boarding house, well appointed and discreet. The landlady, a pinched-looking woman with a fondness for brooches, answered the door. "Miss Moreau? Yes, she's in. Second floor, end of the hall." Poirot and Hastings ascended the stairs quietly. Poirot knocked twice. The door opened a crack. A single blue eye peered through the gap. "Yes." "Miss Moreau, I am Hercule Poirot. May we speak with you for a moment?" There was a pause. Then the door opened fully. The woman who stood before them was indeed striking. Tall, dark-haired, with high cheekbones and a poise that suggested ballet or stagecraft. She wore a silk robe in deep sapphire, and regarded them with calm suspicion. "I know who you are, Monsieur Poirot. Please come in." A room was sparse but elegant. A vase of lilies on the mantel, a vanity table with brushes laid out like surgical tools, and on the writing desk, identical stationery to the one used in the threatening note. "I suppose you've come about Lord Winthrop," she said, gesturing to chairs. "I expected as much." "You admit to sending the note?" Poirot asked. "I do. I wished to rattle him. I believe I succeeded." "Why?" Her expression hardened. "Because men like him believe their pasts are buried. But the past does not stay buried, monsieur. It festers. You knew Celeste Dubois." She laughed once, a short, bitter sound. "I was Celeste Dubois. Valérie Moreau is the name I took when I left Cairo." Hastings sat forward, stunned. "You faked your own disappearance?" "I disappeared, yes, but not in the way the rumors claimed. There was no murder, no theft, only disgrace. I had to leave or be destroyed." Poirot leaned in. "Why return now?" "Because Arthur Winthrop is no longer just a man with secrets. He's poised to take a cabinet post, Minister for Foreign Affairs, and I cannot allow it. You believe he is unfit." "I know he is," she said with venom. "He was involved in smuggling stolen antiquities. He betrayed colleagues, friends, me. He left me to take the fall. I lost everything." "And the cigarette case?" "A symbol. He once gave me a similar case in Cairo, a token of what I thought was love. I had a copy made before I left. I wanted him to feel that tremor of fear, that flicker of memory." Poirot studied her. "And what do you plan to do now, mademoiselle?" "I've done it. The case, the letter, is unraveling. It won't be long before others start asking questions." Poirot nodded slowly. "You seek justice, then, not vengeance?" "There's a difference." Hastings shifted uncomfortably, but Poirot remained composed. "Perhaps. But, mademoiselle, I must ask, have you spoken to anyone else? Shared what you know?" Her face grew still. "Only one person. A journalist, a discreet one." "Name?" She hesitated. "Daniel Ferris. He's writing a piece on colonial corruption. If anything happens to me, he knows everything." Poirot rose. "Then I suggest you be careful, very careful." As they left, Hastings exhaled. "Well, that was something. She's not mad, but she's dangerous." Poirot shook his head. "No, Hastings, she is wounded, and the wounded, when cornered, may strike harder than the guilty." They were halfway down the street when Poirot stopped suddenly. "What is it?" Hastings asked. "She said she told only one person, but the note arrived before she visited the journalist, which means—" He looked up sharply. "There is someone else, someone watching them both." Chapter 4. A Deadly Game. The next morning Poirot stood motionless by the window of the flat, hands clasped behind his back, watching the bustling street below, as though the very rhythm of the city might offer up an answer. The kettle whistled softly in the background, but Hastings made no move to pour the tea. He could tell from the slight tilt of Poirot's head that the great detective was immersed in thought. "There is a third party, Hastings," Poirot said at last, as if continuing a conversation from the previous day. "Someone neither Lord Winthrop nor Mademoiselle Moreau is aware of. Someone who knew about the amber cigarette case. Someone who delivered the note. Hastings frowned. But if Valerie didn't send the letter? She claimed she did, but her timeline was flawed. The note arrived before she met with the journalist. She had not yet revealed herself. None. It was not her. Then who? Poirot turned, eyes bright. We must visit this Daniel Ferris, a journalist with a taste for scandal. He may know more than he realizes. They found Ferris at the offices of the Metropolitan Weekly, a modest publication known for its exposés on political intrigue and high society gossip. Ferris was in his early 40s, lanky with a disheveled charm and ink-stained fingers. He greeted them with mild suspicion and a hint of curiosity. "So, you'll hear about Winthrop, I suppose," he said, motioning them into his cluttered office. "Indeed," Poirot replied, settling into the only chair not covered in paper. "You have been in contact with a Miss Valerie Moreau." Ferris smirked. "You say that like it's a crime." Yet, Hastings muttered. Ferris raised an eyebrow, but ignored the comment. "She came to me last week. Said she had proof linking Lord Winthrop to stolen antiquities. Told me about Cairo, about a cover-up, a disappearance. Fascinating story. I'm verifying it." "You believe her?" "She gave me names, dates, artifacts. Not things you invent easily. It checks out. I was planning to publish in a week or two." "Were you aware of the amber cigarette case?" Poirot asked. "No," Ferris said, frowning. "What does that have to do with it?" "Someone placed it in Lord Winthrop's study. Someone meant to rattle him." "You are certain Miss Moreau said nothing of the case to you?" Ferris nodded. "Positive. Then the plot thickens," Poirot murmured. As they exited the building, Hastings looked sideways at Poirot. "So she didn't send the note. She never met Poirot. So she didn't send the note. She never mentioned the cigarette case to Ferris, but the case and the note still appeared." Poirot nodded. "It means someone else knew about her return. Someone who wants to fan the flames." They walked in silence until they reached the corner. Then Poirot stopped abruptly, his brow furrowed. "Hastings," he said slowly, "let us consider. What if the third party is not merely watching, but orchestrating? You mean someone trying to pit Valerie and Winthrop against each other?" "Precisely. And in such situations, one must always consider who stands to gain from ruin." That afternoon, Poirot arranged another visit with Lady Winthrop. She received them in the drawing-room, dressed in dove-grey silk and wearing an expression that hovered between relief and apprehension. "My husband is behaving strangely," she confided as they sat. "He is evasive, distracted. Yesterday he dismissed his valet of 20 years. No explanation. And last night I found him burning papers in the fireplace." Poirot's eyebrows lifted. "Papers of what nature?" "I could not say. He was furious that I interrupted him. But he is unravelling. And you, madame, do you believe his past is catching up to him?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I have always suspected there was more to Cairo than he ever told me. I once found an old letter, written in French. I could not read it, but he tore it up when he saw me holding it. Do you still have the pieces?" She reached into a drawer and produced a small envelope, sealed with a ribbon. Inside were fragments of a letter, torn diagonally, the paper brittle, but still legible. In places, Poirot laid the pieces on the table, piecing together lines of cursive script. "You promised me safety. They will come for us both. I am not your scapegoat." It was signed with an elegant flourish. C.D. Poirot nodded grimly. Celeste Dubois. Lady Winthrop pressed a hand to her mouth. "So, it's true. She's alive?" "Yes, madam, and she has returned with purpose." As they made to leave, Poirot paused by the mantel and studied a framed photograph of Lord Winthrop standing beside two other men in military dress. "Who are these gentlemen?" he asked casually. "The one on the left is Colonel Markham, an old friend. The other—" She trailed off. "That's Sir Alton Redmayne. He and Arthur served together in Egypt." Poirot's gaze lingered on the photograph. "Sir Alton. A powerful man now, is he not? He's a member of the Privy Council. Influential. But we've not seen him in years." Outside, Poirot's voice was low and deliberate. "Hastings, we may have found our conductor, Sir Alton Redmayne. He was part of the Cairo affair. Perhaps he has reason to fear its return. But why get involved now? To protect his legacy? Or perhaps more? What if he knows Raleigh has returned? What if he planted the cigarette case? Sent the note? You think Redmayne is behind it all?" "I do not know yet, but I intend to find out." That evening, Poirot made discreet inquiries through his government contacts. By the next morning, he had what he needed. Sir Alton Redmayne resided in Hughes, a country estate outside Richmond. Poirot wasted no time arranging a visit under the pretence of discussing a mutual acquaintance, Lord Winthrop. Redmayne received them in his study, a stately room adorned with relics of military campaigns and hunting trophies. He was a large man with a booming voice and penetrating eyes, but his charm was as polished as his medals. "Poirot, yes, I've heard of you," he said, offering a firm handshake. "What brings you to my door?" "I am investigating a matter concerning Lord Winthrop and an old associate, Miss Celeste Dubois." Redmayne stiffened almost imperceptibly. That name should have stayed buried. Poirot smiled faintly. "Alas, it has not. She has returned. She has spoken to a journalist." Redmayne's eyes narrowed. "That woman is a liar, a manipulator. If she's back, it's to destroy what others have built." "Is that your fear, Sir Alton?" Redmayne rose slowly. "My fear, Monsieur Poirot, is that the country cannot afford scandal. We are on the edge of a new political era. Winthrop's appointment is critical enough to warrant sending a warning. An amber cigarette case, a note. The silence in the room thickened like a storm about to break. "You're accusing me. I am asking," Poirot said softly. Redmayne's jaw clenched. "I would do many things for this country, but I do not deal in games or petty threats. If I wanted Winthrop silenced, it would not be through poetry and props." Poirot studied him for a long moment. Then he inclined his head. "Merci, Sir Alton. That will be all. For now." As they left the estate, Hastings exhaled. Well, was he lying? Poirot's eyes were clouded with thought. He spoke the truth, Hastings, but only the part of it that served his interests. They had not yet found their puppet master, but Poirot could feel the strings tightening. And somewhere, hidden behind veils of smoke and silence, the fire still burned. Chapter 5. The Shadow Behind the Smoke. The rain had begun to fall in earnest by the time Poirot and Hastings returned, to the city. It struck the window panes of their Baker Street flat with a sharp rhythm, as though the sky itself were anxious. Poirot sat unmoving, a single finger tracing slow circles on the armrest of his chair. Hastings had learned to recognize this state of deep contemplation. It was Poirot's mind working in silence, piecing together an invisible mosaic. "What are you thinking?" Hastings finally asked, breaking the quiet. Poirot blinked, then rose and paced to the mantel where the photograph from Lady Winthrop's home now rested. He lifted it delicately. "This image, mon ami, it has become the key. 3 men in Cairo, Winthrop, Markham, and Redmayne. One is terrified, one is aggressive, and the third silent. Colonel Markham, we know much about Winthrop. We are beginning to see Redmayne's hand, heavy though it may be. But Markham, he is the missing note in the chord. Where is he now?" Hastings frowned. "Lady Winthrop didn't say. Do we have any contacts in military intelligence?" "We do," Poirot said, picking up the telephone. "Or rather, I do." He placed a call to an old acquaintance, Major Giles Everley, who owed Poirot more than a few favours after a matter involving stolen dispatches and a rather unfortunate gambling debt. An hour later, they had their answer. Colonel Markham was retired and residing in a manor house in Somerset. He kept to himself, rarely received visitors, and had, by all accounts, grown increasingly reclusive. "He is hiding," Poirot said as he hung up the receiver. "Not from the public, from his past." "Do you think he's behind the cigarette case?" Poirot shook his head. "No, Hastings, but he may know who is." They arranged for a visit the following morning, and took the first train to Somerset. The countryside blurred past, green and gold under clearing skies, but Poirot's mood remained stormy. They arrived at Markham's estate, Ashdown House, just past noon. It was a stately home, though it had clearly faded with time. The hedges were overgrown, and ivy curled greedily around the corners of the stone facade. The butler, an elderly man with sunken eyes, showed them to a drawing-room where Markham waited. He was older than his photograph suggested, with a face like weathered leather and a stiffness to his limbs that bespoke lingering wounds, both physical and emotional. "You're Poirot," he said, his voice gruffly. "Oh, the detective." "Yes, Colonel. And this is Captain Hastings. We come on a matter concerning your former associate, Lord Winthrop." Markham exhaled slowly and sank into a chair. "I imagined someone would come eventually. Everything done in Cairo was always going to come back, wasn't it?" Poirot inclined his head. "The past has a long shadow." Markham rubbed his temples. "I've tried to forget it. God knows I've tried. But the others, they moved on. Alton into politics, Arthur into diplomacy. I stayed behind with the weight of it." "And Celeste Dubois?" Poirot asked gently. Markham looked up, pain flashing behind his eyes. "She didn't deserve what happened. She was caught in a web spun by men who thought themselves untouchable. She trusted Arthur, loved him, I think. But when the antiquities went missing, when the scandal broke, they needed someone to take the fall. She was convenient, French, a woman easily discredited. You knew she was innocent. I knew. But I was under orders. Redmayne told me to let it happen. said it was the only way to preserve the diplomatic mission. And now, Markham looked out the window. Now I live in a house I didn't earn with a pension I don't deserve. Poirot moved closer. Colonel, did you send the note to Winthrop? Markham blinked. Note? The one that arrived the morning after the cigarette case was discovered. A message. A spark glows again in the amber. Soon it will burn. Markham shook his head. No, I didn't send anything. Poirot studied him for a moment, then nodded. Thank you, Colonel. You have been most honest. As they walked back to the car, Hastings looked troubled. He seemed broken. Poirot nodded. Guilt does that, Hastings. It corrodes the soul. But I believe him. He did not send the note. He may have stood aside once, but he is not our current enemy. So we're back to Redmayne. Perhaps, or perhaps someone altogether different, someone we've overlooked. Back in London, they returned to the tobacconist once more. Poirot had a thought, one that had nagged at him since their last visit. You said the woman came in twice, he reminded the shopkeeper. Once to buy the cigarettes, once to ask if her purchase had caused a stir. Did anyone else come in afterward? Anyone asking questions? The tobacconist rubbed his chin. Now that you mention it, yes. A man, tall, neat beard, glasses, said he was a collector. Wanted to know who had bought the Turkish jasmine blend, offered money for a name. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Did he give one? No, sir, but he left a card by accident. The man reached under the counter and produced a white calling card, slightly smudged. On it was printed, Edward Branson, Curator. Middle Eastern Antiquities, British Museum. Poirot took the card and examined it. Merci. You have given us something very important. They arrived at the British Museum just before closing and were escorted to the Middle Eastern wing. Edward Branson was there, just as described. He greeted them with the wary courtesy of a man who preferred ancient relics to living people. You're here about the cigarettes, I assume, he said coolly. Indeed, Poirot replied, though that is merely the tip of the pyramid, as it were. Branson sighed. I suppose it was inevitable. I heard about Winthrop's little surprise. You showed great interest in who purchased those cigarettes, Poirot said. Why? Branson folded his arms. Because I recognized the scent. Jasmine and Turkish tobacco. Celeste wore it. She used to frequent the museum in Cairo. I remember her well. You knew her? I admired her. She had a sharp mind, a deep appreciation for the artifacts. But she was entangled with dangerous men. I tried to warn her. She laughed. And when you saw the case had resurfaced, Branson's gaze darkened. I knew what it meant. I feared the storm was returning, and I wanted to know if she was behind it, or someone pretending to be. Poirot stepped closer. Did you send the note? Branson blinked. The note? No, I didn't know there was one. Did you place the case? I wouldn't even know how to find the original. I only heard whispers. Someone has gone to a great deal of trouble to revive the ghost of Cairo. Poirot nodded slowly. And ghosts, Mr. Branson, do not rise without cause. As they exited the museum, Hastings turned to Poirot. So, if not Branson, not Markham, not even Redmayne, who then? Poirot's eyes narrowed as he looked out over the rain-drenched city. Someone who knew them all. someone who stood in the shadows while Cairo burned, someone with a score to settle. And you think we've met them already? I think, Hastings, Poirot said softly, they may be closer than we dare believe. Chapter 6. The Secrets of the Museum. The following morning brought a chill wind across London, and with it came a new note. It was slid under the door of Poirot's flat some time before dawn. No stamp, no handwriting on the outside. Just a folded piece of ivory paper sealed with a faint trace of perfume, a familiar trace of jasmine. Poirot opened it with the same delicacy he reserved for unraveling fine lace. Hastings leaned over his shoulder as he read aloud. You chase phantoms while the truth lies in plain sight. Ask the mirror what it hides. The fire is almost lit. C.D. Hastings straightened. She's playing games with us. No, mon ami, Poirot said softly. She is warning us. He held the paper to his nose and inhaled. The same scent as the cigarettes. Deliberate. And the message. It's not meant to mislead. It's meant to direct. To where? Poirot turned, his eyes bright. To someone who hides behind reflection. The mirror is a clue. Not metaphorical, literal. Hastings blinked. You think she means an actual mirror? Poirot was already moving, retrieving the fragments of Celeste's torn letter Lady Winthrop had given him. He examined them again. There's a pattern here. She wrote, they will come for us both. Not him. Us. There is someone else she is protecting. Someone who stood beside her. You think she's not acting alone? I think she never was. That afternoon, Poirot requested a second audience with Valérie Moreau, Celeste Dubois, under the pretense of clarification. She agreed, somewhat reluctantly, to meet them at a quiet café in Bloomsbury. She arrived cloaked in a pale wool coat, sunglasses, and a silk scarf, the very picture of elegant anonymity. She slid into the seat opposite Poirot without a word and gestured for tea. You've stirred a storm, mademoiselle, Poirot said without preamble. The past is unspooling like a film reel. I only wanted him to see, she replied softly, to remember what he did. Who is helping you? Poirot asked gently. Her fingers tightened around the teacup. I beg your pardon. You are not alone in this. The note today was not in your hand. The cigarette case was placed with precision. You are many things, mademoiselle, but a ghost is not one of them. She stared at him for a long moment, then looked away. There is someone, she said at last, but they mean no harm. They only want justice. Justice, Poirot murmured. For whom? For all of us. For what was stolen. You must tell me their name. She hesitated. I cannot. They've protected me for too long. To expose them now. They have already exposed themselves, Poirot interrupted. There are forces moving against you, against Winthrop. And if I am to prevent harm, I must know all. She studied him. At last she spoke. Her name is Iris Merriman. She was a curator in training at the museum in Cairo. Quiet, brilliant, unnoticed. She saw everything. When the scandal broke, they overlooked her. But she kept the records. She kept everything. Where is she now? She works under a pseudonym at the British Museum. She never stopped collecting the truth. Poirot sat back, processing. Then the mirror was Iris. Reflection. A woman who reflects the past, unseen. Valerie nodded. Poirot turned to Hastings. To the museum, immediately. They arrived just before closing and asked for Miss Iris Merriman. The receptionist blinked. "There's no one by that name," she said. "But we do have a Miss Merrin, works in archiving. Quiet one." They were shown down to the sublevels, where ancient manuscripts and catalogued artifacts sat in pristine rows. Among the dusty ledgers and soft lamplight, a woman stood, a wisp of a figure with steel-grey eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, hair pulled into a severe bun. "Miss Merrin?" Poirot asked. She turned. Her face gave away nothing. "Yes. I am Hercule Poirot. This is Captain Hastings. We understand you knew Celeste Dubois." The barest flicker passed across her expression. "I did. I still do. You have been helping her." Silence. Poirot stepped forward. "She told us everything. About the case, about Cairo, about you." Miss Merriman sighed and pulled a stool to sit. "Then there's little point in pretending." "Why now?" Hastings asked. "After all these years?" "Because he was about to be knighted," she said with quiet fury. "Given a place of power. Arthur Winthrop destroyed lives. Celeste lost everything. And Redmayne, he paved the cover-up. I watched it all from the shadows. And I waited." "Waited for what?" "For people to care again." Poirot said nothing for a moment. Then, "You planted the cigarette case." "Yes. It was a replica, but exact. I made it myself using the design sketches Celeste once drew. And the note?" She nodded. "I sent the first one. Celeste sent today's. She thought I was being reckless. She's right." "But why warn him?" Hastings asked. "You could have let the scandal fall on him." "I didn't want his death, only his disgrace. The truth out, the record corrected." Poirot paced slowly. "There is more. Someone else is moving pieces." The cigarette case shook Winthrop. But it was not what made him burn papers. It was not what prompted him to dismiss his valet or to grow paranoid. Merrin looked up sharply. "You think someone else is after him?" Poirot nodded. "Yes. A third hand. Not yours. Not Celeste's. Someone ruthless. Someone who sees this as an opportunity for elimination, not justice." "But who?" Merrin asked, alarmed. "That," Poirot said, "is what I intend to discover, and quickly. Because if I do not, the next thing to burn may not be paper." That evening, Poirot requested an urgent visit with Lord Winthrop. Surprisingly, the man agreed. They arrived at his townhouse as the lamps were being lit. The streets washed gold in the haze of dusk. Winthrop looked exhausted. His eyes rimmed with red, his voice brittle. He stood beside the fireplace, as though afraid to move from it. "If you come to arrest me, Poirot," he said with a bitter smile. "No, milord," Poirot said quietly. "I have come to warn you." He relayed all they had learned. Celeste, Iris Merriman, the replica case, the notes. As he spoke, Winthrop sagged, inch by inch, until he sat heavily in the armchair, head in hands. "It was supposed to be buried," he murmured. "Redmayne said it would be. He told me Celeste had been paid off, that she'd vanished. She survived, and she remembered." Winthrop looked up. "I deserve it all, every accusation, but I didn't kill anyone." Poirot blinked. Kill? Poirot blinked. Kill? Winthrop nodded. Redmayne, he's dead. They found him an hour ago in his study. Gunshot. They say it was suicide, but... The room fell into a deep silence. Poirot rose slowly. Then we are too late. Hastings whispered. Do you think it was really suicide? Poirot's face was grim. No, I think the third hand has struck. He turned to Winthrop. You are no longer a man of influence, my lord. You are a target. As they stepped back into the darkened street, Poirot lifted his eyes to the inky sky. The case is no longer about memory, he said. It is now about murder. Chapter 7. Whispers in the Dark. The morning after Redmayne's death dawned grey and silent, like a breath held too long. News of the diplomat's sudden demise had broken across the newspapers in dry official tones. Tragic suicide of former ambassador. Diplomatic illness suspected. No foul play reported. Poirot sat in his flat reading the report in the Times, his moustaches twitching in mild contempt. They always write of death with such efficiency, let's spy Hastings, as if grief were merely a clerical matter. Hastings stirred his tea. Do you really think it was murder? Poirot folded the paper carefully. The timing, mon ami. The death of Redmayne comes at the moment pressure was mounting. First the cigarette case, then the messages, the visit to Markham, Celeste's reappearance, and Redmayne, who stood at the centre of the old cover-up, dies just as the past begins to speak again. Hastings looked grim. So we're dealing with someone cleaning up old messes. Just so. But who? There came a sharp knock at the door. Poirot stood to answer it himself, and was surprised to find Iris Merriman standing in the hallway, her face pale, her eyes wide. I had to come, she said. There's something I didn't tell you. She stepped inside, her hands trembling slightly as she removed her gloves. You said someone else might be moving, she said. Someone more dangerous than Celeste or myself. I didn't want to believe it, but after Redmayne, I remembered something. Poirot motioned her to sit. Tell me everything. There was a fourth man, she said quietly, in Cairo, not part of the diplomatic mission officially, but always around. A private consultant, a fixer they called him. He handled problems. His name was Quentin Vale. Poirot's brows lifted. Vale, she nodded. He had a military background that unofficially worked for Redmayne. When the antiquities went missing, he vanished. I assumed he'd been dismissed. But now, Poirot stood still, eyes narrowed in thought. Quentin Vale. That name I do not know. I tried to find records of him at the museum, Iris continued, but there's nothing. No official documents, just mentions in side notes and whispered references in old correspondences. It's as if he erased himself. Then perhaps, Poirot murmured, he is the one who prefers silence to justice, and who will kill to preserve it. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of investigation. Poirot sent telegrams to military archives, former intelligence officers, and old diplomatic contacts. By evening, they had their answer. Quentin Vale had resurfaced several years earlier under a new identity, Mr. Vincent Harrow, an art security advisor consulting with several major museums in London. Most recently, he'd been hired on a temporary basis by the British Museum. assisting with the security audit following a failed burglary attempt in the Middle Eastern Antiquities Wing. Poirot sat back, fingers steepled. He returned to the scene, he said, not because he must, but because he wants to control the narrative. You think he's responsible for Redmayne's death? Hastings asked. I am almost certain. And if he is who I believe he is, then Celeste and Iris are both in danger. Poirot wasted no time. He telephoned Valerie Moreau and insisted she meet him at Scotland Yard, where she would be safe. She hesitated only briefly before agreeing. When she arrived, she was pale but composed. Inspector Japp, summoned by Poirot, listened as the full truth was laid out: Celeste's past, the forged cigarette case, the warning letters, and the sudden death of Redmayne. And this frail fellow, Japp asked, do you have proof? Only inference at present, Poirot admitted. But inference, mes amis, is often the harbinger of truth. He had motive, he had opportunity, and he has the skill to make murder look like suicide. Side. I'll get a watch put on this Harrow, quietly. No need to spook him. That would be most wise. Poirot turned to Celeste. You must remain here until we know more. You are the symbol, mademoiselle, the living memory they seek to extinguish. She nodded, her voice low. I understand. Hastings and Poirot left the yard late, the lamplight glinting on wet cobblestones. As they reached the corner near Soho, Poirot suddenly paused. Do you smell that? He asked. Hastings sniffed. Smoke? Jasmine, Poirot said. Burning jasmine. They turned the corner, and there, to their horror, saw smoke curling from the windows of Iris Merriman's apartment building. Poirot broke into a run, unusual for him, and Hastings followed. Fire engines were already on the scene, shouting men hauling hoses as flames licked the second story. Poirot forced his way to the edge of the crowd. Was anyone inside? He asked a constable. A woman, the constable replied grimly. Archivist. They pulled her out unconscious. Smoke inhalation. Poirot exhaled in relief. Alive? Barely. She's being taken to St. Bartholomew's. Poirot turned to Hastings. We go. Now. At the hospital, they found Iris in a narrow bed, wrapped in linens, an oxygen mask over her face. A nurse ushered them in, warning that she might not be awake for long. Poirot sat beside her and gently took her hand. Mademoiselle Iris, it is Hercule Poirot. Can you hear me? Her eyelids fluttered, then a faint nod. Who did this? She whispered through the mask, barely audible. He was already there, waiting. I heard the lock break. Get-il, you see him? Another weak nod. Older, scar on the jaw, called me a liability. Poirot's jaw tightened. Vale, her grip on his hand tightened momentarily. His hand tightened momentarily, before her eyes closed again, her strength spent. Back in the corridor, Poirot turned to Hastings. We must find him, tonight, before he disappears again. But how? Poirot was already dialing a number. We know he's Vincent Harrow. He's working under contract for the British Museum. We go there. It was nearly midnight when they arrived at the museum. With Japp's help and a warrant hastily acquired, they were granted access. A sleepy night watchman unlocked the gates, squinting at the paperwork. I believe he's staying in the East Wing offices, Poirot said. temporary quarters for staff in from abroad. Guided by flickering torches and creaking floors, they made their way through the darkened hallways. At last, they reached a door marked Vincent Harrow, consultant. Japp nodded. "Let's see what he's hiding." They forced the door. Inside was a small, tidy room. Bookshelves lined with volumes on ancient civilizations, a roll-top desk, and a cot against the far wall. But what caught their attention was the case open on the desk. Inside it lay photographs. Cairo, 1930s, Celeste, Redmayne, Markham, and a young Quentin Vale, unmistakable even with time's changes, his jaw still marred by a thin scar. There were notes, too, schedules, addresses, Iris Merriman's file. Japp swore softly. "He's been watching them all." Poirot reached into the case and pulled out something else. An amber cigarette case. Not the replica, the original. "It was never lost," he said quietly. "Vale kept it, as insurance, as memory, and when Celeste reappeared, he feared exposure." Suddenly, a shadow shifted in the hallway. "Down!" Hastings shouted. A shot rang out, splintering wood as it punched through the doorframe. They took cover. Japp returned fire. The shadow vanished down the corridor. "He's here," Poirot called out. "We must not lose him." But by the time they reached the back exit, Vale was gone, slipped into the night once more. Japp swore again. "He'll vanish. Men like him always do." "No," Poirot said. "He will make one more move, a final act to erase the past forever." Chapter 8. The Trap is Set. The rain fell in sheets the next morning, turning the streets of London into sluggish rivers. The press, as expected, had pounced on the fire at Iris Merriman's apartment, reporting it as part of a larger, undisclosed scandal involving high-profile figures. They were never far behind, those vultures. The papers were rife with speculation. Was the fire connected to the mysterious disappearance of Quentin Vale? Was he alive? Was he behind the death of Redmayne? The questions only piled on top of one another, creating an intoxicating cocktail of uncertainty and fear. Poirot was pacing in his flat when Hastings arrived, a soaked trench coat clinging to his frame. "It's the same with every case, isn't it?" Hastings said, shedding his coat and sitting down. "The closer we get to the answers, the more confusing it becomes." Poirot nodded absently. "Yes, mon ami. But that is why I must be precise. Even when the path twists, it always leads somewhere." The sound of a knock at the door interrupted them. Poirot opened it to reveal a dishevelled Inspector Japp, who immediately stepped inside, brushing water from his cap. "I've spoken to the hospital," Japp said, sitting down heavily. "Iris Merriman is awake, just barely, and I've got word that the fire at her flat wasn't entirely random. They found a peculiar residue in the ashes. It's like an accelerant, but not one commonly used. Something specific." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "An accelerant? Interesting. Yes, the forensic team is looking into it, but it's clear that someone wanted to ensure the fire did its job. They didn't just want to destroy the apartment. They wanted to erase evidence. Which means," Poirot said, "someone has been hiding something very important." "Exactly," Japp agreed. "And then there's the matter of Vale. We have no official record of him leaving London, but there are whispers he was seen near the docks last night. We've lost track of him. Again." Poirot stood up, smoothing his suit. We are closing in on him, Jap. I know it, but he will not go down easily. He is an expert in the art of disappearance. What now, Poirot? Hastings asked, leaning forward. Poirot's face darkened, and he spoke in a low, almost reverent voice. There is something larger at play here. This case, this game, has been manipulated from the beginning, and I believe we are not the first ones to have seen the pattern. We have been led to where we are. By whom? Hastings asked. Poirot shook his head, his mind whirring with thoughts. By someone with a far greater stake in all of this. Someone who has orchestrated the entire chain of events. Perhaps even Redmayne's death. You mean Vale? Jap said, leaning forward. Or someone else? I do not know yet, Poirot replied, tapping his fingers thoughtfully. But I believe I know how to find out. That afternoon, Poirot, Hastings, and Jap arrived at the British Museum once again. The building loomed above them, silent and imperious in the dull light. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of ancient history, the weight of centuries bearing down on them as they moved through the hushed hallways. Poirot led the way, a sense of urgency in his steps. He stopped in front of an exhibit display in the Middle Eastern Antiquities section. It was a collection of ancient scrolls, relics, and a few priceless artifacts from Egypt, all carefully arranged. Poirot glanced at his watch. There is something here, he said quietly. A missing piece. Something connected to Redmayne's dealings in Cairo. Something that Vale, or Harrow, as he now calls himself, would want to keep hidden. Jap raised an eyebrow. What are you thinking, Poirot? I believe we have been misled. It is not just the past that Vale is trying to erase. It is something he thinks can be used against him. Something in this museum. Hastings stared at the display. You think something is missing? Poirot nodded. Precisely. And I have a theory on what it might be. With a sudden burst of determination, Poirot turned to one of the museum curators who had been standing nearby. Excuse me, sir, he said, his voice warm but insistent. Can you tell me when the last audit was conducted on the artifacts in this section? The curator blinked. An audit? Well, we conduct regular checks, of course. The last one was about 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago. There was an issue with some of the items being catalogued incorrectly, but everything has been rectified. Poirot's eyes narrowed. 3 weeks ago. You are certain that nothing was added or moved? The curator shuffled his feet, looking uncomfortable. I can't say for sure, sir, but the inventory should be correct. It always is. Poirot smiled, a thin, calculating smile. Very well. Then I suggest we double-check. He turned to Jap. If I am correct, then Vale has left a trail. He would not simply hide the object. He would leave a clue behind, something to reassure himself that his plan is still intact. It took hours, but Poirot's suspicion was proven correct. After a meticulous search, they uncovered a small compartment hidden beneath the floorboards of the exhibit. Inside the compartment lay a single artifact, a fragment of an ancient Egyptian tablet. It was a piece that had been marked as lost decades ago, but its absence had never been thoroughly investigated. The fragment was unassuming, but the markings on it were unmistakable. They were the same as those found on a private letter discovered among Redmayne's effects. Bingo, Poirot muttered, turning the piece over carefully. Japp looked at the tablet in surprise. This was lost, but this changes everything. Poirot nodded. Indeed, Redmayne did not steal the artifacts, mon ami. He was involved in something far darker, and Vale has been working to cover up the connections. But why would Vale want this hidden? Hastings asked. What does it mean? It means, Poirot said with quiet conviction, that Redmayne was more than just a pawn. He was part of a much larger scheme, a conspiracy that stretches all the way back to the diplomatic missions in Cairo. And Vale, who has spent his life manipulating the situation, has been covering up his tracks ever since. But why kill Redmayne? Japp asked. If he was involved in the plot? Because Redmayne became a liability, Poirot said, his gaze cold. He was about to be honored, knighted, and his past with all its messy secrets was about to come to light. Vale couldn't allow that. He had to silence him before the truth caught up. Hastings looked grim. So the fire at Iris's place, it was to stop her from talking too? Poirot nodded. Yes, Vale couldn't risk her revealing the truth. And Celeste? She's next. They left the museum, the fragments of the puzzle falling into place one by one. Poirot was confident now. The pieces were all aligned. The game was nearing its end. But one question remained. Where was Vale? Poirot's mind raced as he formulated a plan. They would have to move quickly, or Vale would disappear for good. But this time, Poirot had an edge. He had the missing piece, the artifact, and it was the one thing Vale couldn't afford to lose. The hour was late when Poirot, Hastings and Japp gathered at the museum once more, this time with a team of detectives. We'll move in quietly, Poirot said. Vale will not expect us to strike now, but he will try to retrieve the artifact. That is where we have the advantage. And as they moved into the darkened halls of the British Museum, Poirot knew one thing for certain. Vale would not be slipping away again. Chapter 9. The Final Confrontation. The night air was thick with the scent of rain, as Poirot, Hastings, and Japp made their way toward the entrance of the British Museum. The detectives had gathered, prepared for the quiet operation that was about to unfold. Poirot's mind was sharp and focused. He knew this would be the moment they could trap Vale. The game had reached its final stage, and his patience was about to be rewarded. Tonight, mon ami, Poirot said softly, his voice carrying a weight of certainty. Tonight we catch him. Hastings was silent, his eyes scanning the street, as if expecting Vale to appear at any moment. Japp, always the pragmatic one, walked briskly ahead, holding a flashlight in his hand. Poirot kept to the shadows, allowing the others to take the lead while he considered the last pieces of the puzzle. Vale had been clever, slipping away each time they came close. But now the fragment of the Egyptian tablet was in their possession, and Poirot was convinced it was the final key. He knew that Vale wouldn't be able to resist retrieving it. The question was, where would he strike next? I've sent word to the team, Japp said as they approached the museum's back entrance. They'll be in position. Poirot nodded. Good. No mistakes tonight, Inspector. No errors. We must act with precision. They moved quickly, entering the museum through a rear door that led to a labyrinth of corridors. The hallways were dimly lit, the echo of their footsteps muffled by the thick carpets beneath their feet. Poirot led them through the museum's quiet galleries, his eyes sharp, noting every detail along the way. It was always the smallest details that made a difference in Poirot's mind. They arrived at the Middle Eastern antiquities section, where the artifact had been discovered. The exhibit stood silent in the shadows, and Poirot knew that Vale would be heading there. It was the logical place, the place where the object had been kept hidden, the place where Vale could still retrieve it if he acted swiftly enough. Poirot crouched beside a display case, his fingers brushing against the cool glass. He felt the familiar surge of anticipation, a quiet thrill that came with the chase. The puzzle was nearly solved, and Vale was the last piece. "This is it," Poirot murmured. "He will be here soon." Japp looked at him, his brow furrowed in concern. "Are you sure?" Poirot nodded, his expression unyielding. "I am certain." Hastings, who had been watching their surroundings with increasing tension, turned to Poirot. "And if Vale doesn't show up, what then?" Poirot's gaze was steady, his mind working even as he spoke. "Then we wait. But I have no doubt he will come. The fragment is too valuable to him. He will try to take it back." The minutes stretched into what felt like hours, as the three of them waited in silence. The distant hum of the city outside seemed to fade away, replaced by the stillness of the museum. Poirot's patience was unshakable, his focus absolute. He knew the importance of this moment. Suddenly, there was a faint sound, a soft scrape of a door opening somewhere ahead. Poirot's sharp ears picked it up immediately. "Voilà," he whispered. The sound of footsteps followed, light and cautious. They were deliberate but quiet, as if someone was trying to remain unnoticed. Poirot straightened, a small smile playing on his lips. The trap had been set, and now Vale was walking right into it. Poirot motioned for Japp and Hastings to stay back. He moved into the shadows, his figure merging with the darkness of the hallway. He waited, every sense attuned to the slightest movement. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and then there he was, Quentin Vale, dressed in a dark coat, his face obscured by the shadows. He moved with the confidence of someone who knew the museum's layout well, someone who had been here many times before. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he studied Vale's movements. Vale approached the display case where the fragment of the tablet was kept. His eyes flicked over the artifacts as if he were surveying the room, ensuring no one was watching. Poirot remained perfectly still, his breath steady. With a sudden movement, Vale reached into the case, his fingers brushing against the ancient tablet. Poirot's heart quickened. This was the moment. Vale was too focused on the fragment to notice the two detectives who were now moving into position behind him. Just as Vale's fingers closed around the tablet, Poirot stepped forward, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "Monsieur Vale," he said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "It is over." Vale froze, his hand still hovering over the tablet. His eyes darted around, taking in the sight of Poirot, Japp and Hastings as they emerged from the shadows. For a split second, there was a flicker of panic in his eyes, but it was quickly masked by a forced calm. "I should have known it was you, Poirot," Vale said with a sneer. "You've been trailing me for far too long. But you won't stop me now." Poirot remained unshaken. "You were always one step ahead, Monsieur Vale, but now we have you." Vale's eyes darkened. "You don't understand, Poirot. There's much more at play here than you realize. The past is never truly buried. You think you've uncovered the truth, but you're just scratching the surface." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps, but the surface is enough for justice to be served. And it will be served, Monsieur Vale, whether you like it or not." With a swift motion, Vale reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small pistol, aiming it at Poirot. The tension in the room escalated instantly, but Poirot didn't flinch. "You'll regret this, Poirot," Vale hissed, his finger tightening on the trigger. But before Vale could fire, a sharp sound rang through the air, a loud crack, followed by the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. Vale's eyes widened in shock as the pistol slipped from his hand, falling to the floor with a clatter. Dub had fired his weapon, his aim perfect. Vale staggered back, his hand clutching his side where the bullet had grazed him. His breath was ragged, and the anger in his eyes was replaced by fear. He took a step back, then another, but he was trapped. "This is over," Japp said, his voice steady. Vale's face twisted in frustration, but he knew there was no escape. His hands fell to his sides, and he slowly sank to his knees. The gun was no longer a threat. He was caught. Poirot stepped forward, his expression grave but resolute. "You have evaded justice for far too long, Monsieur Vale, but now it ends." Vale gave a bitter laugh, his breath shallow. "You think this will stop anything? You think you've won? You've only uncovered part of the story. There are others who will carry on. It's too late for all of you." Poirot's eyes softened, but only for a moment. "Perhaps, but tonight justice will be done. And for you, Monsieur Vale, there will be no escape." Japp stepped forward, signaling the arresting officers who had been waiting in the wings. "Take him away." As Vale was led out of the museum, his head bowed in defeat, Poirot stood silently, watching him go. The storm had finally passed, but the mystery was far from over. There were still pieces left to uncover, and Poirot knew that the full extent of the conspiracy was yet to be revealed. But for now, they had their man, and that was enough. "Poirot," Hastings said softly, breaking the silence. "Is it really over?" Poirot turned to him, a faint smile on his lips. "Ah, mon ami, we have caught the criminal, but the true story is far more complicated than any of us could have imagined." Chapter 10. A last puzzle piece. The cold light of morning had barely begun to pierce the thick clouds above London when Hercule Poirot sat in his study, a cup of coffee cooling beside him. His thoughts were far from the warmth of the drink, his mind tangled in the last threads of the mystery that had gripped him for so long. The game had concluded, yet the truth, as always, was more intricate than he had anticipated. The arrest of Quentin Vale had been swift, but his final words lingered in Poirot's mind like the echo of a distant bell. "There are others who will carry on," Vale had said. It was a cryptic message, one that suggested this case was only the tip of a much deeper iceberg. "I must confess, Hastings," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing as he regarded the detective sitting across from him, "that I have been uncomfortable, shall we say, with how easily this case is closed. There is still much that does not make sense." Hastings, his ever-loyal companion, shifted in his chair, his brow furrowing as he took in Poirot's words. "You're not saying Vale wasn't the mastermind behind everything, are you?" Poirot took a small sip of his coffee, his lips pursed in thought. "No, Hastings. He was the key player, yes, but I believe the shadow he cast was larger than even he realized. He was merely a part of a much greater web. I suspect that Vale himself was manipulated by others, but those others remain hidden." Japp had stopped by earlier that morning, reporting that Vale was now in custody and was already singing to the authorities. However, Poirot remained wary. He had always believed that a confession, especially one offered too willingly, was not the final word in solving a mystery. "I just don't understand," Hastings muttered, running his hand through his hair in frustration. "Vale had the motive, the means, and the opportunity. He was the one who burned Redmayne's flat, who killed him, who stole the tablet fragment. What more could there be?" "Ah, but you see, Hastings," Poirot said, tapping his fingers on the desk, "this is where the brilliance of the human mind reveals itself. Vale was clever, but he was not the only one with a hand in this. He was merely following orders, or, perhaps more accurately, pursuing his own interests while someone else orchestrated the entire scheme from behind the scenes." The room fell silent as Poirot's words sank in. Hastings could not deny that Poirot was right. There had been too many unexplained elements to this case for it to be as simple as Vale being the lone criminal. Yet, who could have been the puppet master? The answer eluded him, just as it had eluded Poirot for so many days. Just then, the sound of a knock on the door interrupted their musings. Poirot glanced at Hastings and then gestured for him to answer. The door opened to reveal a young woman, her face drawn with worry. It was Celeste, Iris Merriman's close friend. "Mr. Poirot," she said, her voice trembling, "I need your help. It's about Iris. Something is wrong. She's not herself." Poirot motioned for her to sit, his gaze softening in sympathy. "Please, mademoiselle, tell me everything. I will do my best to understand." Celeste sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I've been staying with Iris at the hospital since she woke up. But last night, something happened. She said that there were people coming for her, that they were after something she didn't understand. She wouldn't go into detail, but she was terrified. She even said that her life was still in danger. I don't know what to think." Poirot's eyes sharpened as he listened intently. "What did she say exactly?" "She said—" Celeste hesitated, as if unsure whether to reveal more. "She said that there were pieces missing, that someone from the past was going to come for the rest of the fragments of the tablet. She spoke of a group, hidden, secretive, and she seemed to know something about them. More than she should have. It's like she's been remembering things, but her memory's scattered. I'm so frightened, Mr. Poirot. What does it all mean?" Poirot's mind raced, and he could feel the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. The fragment of the tablet, the mysterious people Vale had spoken of, the way the fire had been set to destroy everything. These were not isolated events. There was something much larger at work, I believe," Poirot said slowly, his voice deliberate, "that Miss Merriman is remembering more than just the fire. I suspect she has stumbled upon a much deeper conspiracy, one that reaches beyond the artifact. There is something she knows, something critical, but she is unaware of its significance." Celeste looked up at him, her eyes wide with confusion. "You mean she's in danger?" "I believe so," Poirot replied gravely, "and I think the danger is closer than she realizes. The people Vale spoke of, the ones who will carry on, these are the same people who have been manipulating the events behind the scenes. They've been pulling the strings from the very beginning." "But what do they want?" Celeste asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Their motives are unclear, but the tablet is just one part of a much larger puzzle," Poirot explained. "They want control, information, perhaps both. But they will stop at nothing to achieve it." Hastings, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "Do you think Miss Merriman's memory could help us uncover the truth?" Poirot paused, considering the question. "I believe it may, mon ami. We must take her seriously. She may hold the final clue, one that will reveal the rest of the conspiracy. But we must move carefully. If these people are truly as dangerous as I suspect, they will not hesitate to eliminate anyone who stands in their way." Celeste nodded, clearly shaken. "What should I do?" Poirot stood and walked toward the window, gazing out at the city below. His mind was racing, the pieces finally falling into place. "I will visit Miss Merriman. I need to speak with her directly. I must understand exactly what she remembers and what she has forgotten. The key to unraveling this entire affair lies in her mind." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Poirot, Hastings, and Celeste made their way to the hospital where Iris Merriman had been recovering. The air was thick with tension as Poirot entered Iris's room. She was sitting up in bed, her face pale but determined. "Iris," Poirot said, softly, "it is good to see you awake." Iris looked at him, her eyes distant but filled with recognition. "I remember you," she whispered. "You were the one who found the cigarette case. You were the one who solved the mystery." Poirot smiled, though there was no warmth in his expression. "I have solved part of the mystery, yes, but there is still much more to understand. You said that you remembered something. Can you tell me what it was?" Iris's gaze flickered to Celeste, then back to Poirot. "It's all so blurry. But there's something about the tablet, the fragments, and I know there's more, but I can't remember. They told me not to remember. They wanted me to forget, but I didn't." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "Who, Miss Merriman? Who told you to forget?" Iris's eyes widened as a look of realization spread across her face. "I remember now. It was Vale. He came to me, told me I had to stay out of it. He said it wasn't just about the tablet. It was bigger than that. He said there were others who would kill to get what they wanted." Poirot's pulse quickened. "Who are these people, Miss Merriman? What do they want?" "I don't know," she whispered, her voice trembling, "but they'll do anything to keep it all a secret." Poirot's mind raced as the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. The conspiracy was larger than anyone had suspected, and the final act was yet to come. "Thank you, Miss Merriman," Poirot said softly. "You have given me what I needed." With a final glance at Iris, Poirot turned toward the door. The mystery was far from over, but one thing was certain. The game was only just beginning.